In this example, I need to simplify the expression the square root of 54 plus the square root of negative 40. Well, let's first look at the square root of 54. We need to factor 54. There are many different ways of doing it. The first one that comes to my mind is 6 times 9. 6 is not a perfect square, so keep factoring. 6 is 2 times 3. Those are both prime numbers, can't keep going. A 9 is a perfect square, so I'm going to leave that alone. So I'm going to write 54 as the product of 9 times 2 times 3, which is 6. So instead of the square root of 54, I'm going to write the square root of 9 times 6. Plus, now we need to look at the square root of negative 40. Notice I have a negative underneath my square root, so let's quickly review what we do in that case. And remember, the imaginary unit I is defined to be I is the square root of negative 1, where I squared equals negative 1, and that can be used to find the square root of a negative number. So if b is a positive real number, then the square root of negative b is I times the square root of b. So this is what we're going to use to find the square root of negative 40. The first thing we're going to do is write that as I times the square root of positive 40. So going back to my problem, here's my square root of negative 40, so we're going to write that as I times the square root of 40. So now, using the product rule of radicals, the square root of 9 times 6 can be written as the square root of 9 times the square root of 6, plus I times, now we've got to simplify the square root of 40. 40, let's factor that, and I'm going to say it is 4 times 10, because 4 is a perfect square, leave it alone. 10 is 2 times 5. There are no perfect squares hidden in that. So I'm going to write 40 as the square root of 4 times 5 times 2 is 10. So that's going to be the square root of 4 times 10. So now the square root of 9 is 3. I cannot simplify the square root of 6. There are no perfect squares hidden in 6. Plus I times, this can be written as the square root of 4 times the square root of 10. So I'm going to get 3 times the square root of 6 plus, what is the square root of 4? 2. So I'm going to have I times 2 times the square root of 10, which we always write 2I times the square root of 10. These are unlike terms, can't combine them, so that is my answer.